Chapter 1031. Yang Chendong had just experienced a fierce battle in the afternoon. From his point of view, the toughest moment had yet to arrive. The darkness before dawn was the most dangerous. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was fuming. After an afternoon of all-out attacks, more than 10,000 soldiers had died and countless were injured. Most of the injuries were caused by his own soldiers trampling each other as they retreated. He could not accept this result. After 2 battles, he had a rough idea of Yang Chendong's military strength. It was less than 10,000 soldiers. However, in the afternoon, he had sent out 80,000 soldiers to attack from 4 different directions. Not only had none of them made it to the barren mountains, they hadn't injured a single enemy. Moreover, they had suffered such great losses. How could he not be enraged? After venting his anger, Tong Si was in a much better mood. He started to summarize his failures and quickly made 2 important improvements. First, a large reward. Second, an inspection team was set up. The reward was announced publicly. Anyone who captured Yang Chendong alive would be rewarded 10,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 5 ranks. Anyone who killed Yang Chendong would be rewarded 8,000 taels of silver and a promotion of 4 ranks. As the saying went, when there was a large reward, there would be brave men. He believed that this method would be effective on normal soldiers. After all, once this matter was completed, it would change their lives. The inspection team was specially prepared to deal with soldiers who fled in defeat. It was not enough to motivate them with money. They also had to place a lock behind the soldiers. Once they retreated, they would be killed without mercy. In that case, he believed that even if he was tired, he would be able to exhaust the 5-star army to death. Not only these 2, Tong Si also decided to launch an attack at night. Although they were not good at night battles, they could only send the remaining 20 cannons up with the help of the night. Not only that, he also mobilized the remaining 10,000 cavalrymen. His experience during the day told him that the 5-star army was better than the cavalrymen. However, they were not without weaknesses. For example, in terms of numbers, the enemy was at a disadvantage. The 5-star army had a limited number of cavalrymen. They might be able to defend against the cavalrymen in one direction, but what if they attacked in all directions? The shadow cavalry would not be able to disperse their forces. He constantly changed his attack methods and made various preparations. 4 hours later, a set of effective attack methods in Tong's eyes was formulated. In order for the plan to be carried out smoothly, he mobilized a total of 120,000 soldiers to prepare for the attack. Humph. I don't believe that 120,000 of us can't defeat you. If we can't, reinforcements will arrive at any time. I want to see if you are made of iron. After Tong Si finished speaking, he began to issue the attack plan and order to his subordinates. Even at night, the weather in June was still very hot. A light breeze blew, and the stench of blood filled the barren hills. However, the soldiers of the 5-star army acted as if they didn't hear anything. They leaned against the trenches and slept. A good warrior must first learn how to rest, learn how to keep oneself in the best condition. Everyone, pay attention. The enemy's cannons are coming up. In the silence, the scout on duty discovered something and shouted. Boom, boom, boom. As soon as he shouted, the sound of cannons rang out. Then, heavy cannons landed around the barren hills, causing the ground to tremble. When the cannons landed outside the trenches, all the soldiers were awakened from their sleep. Yang Chendong was also awakened the moment the cannons landed. Then, he felt the throbbing of the white dragon horse beside him. He stretched out his arm and gently stroked the horse while listening to the direction of the cannons. As the best soldier king in the past, it could be said that he had spent half of his life dealing with guns and cannons. In this aspect, he had a sense of alertness that others did not have. The direction is northwest. Order the cannons to counterattack. Based on his experience, after roughly determining the location of the enemy's cannons, Yang Chendong decisively gave the order to counterattack. Beta Persei, who had been waiting by the side, immediately shouted with his unique loud voice. Then, the cannoneers began to load the cannons. Then, the cannoneers fired the cannons and landed 2.5 miles northwest. Boom, 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 the Five-Star Army's rapid counterattack blew up 20 cannons of the Siamese army. When he saw that the 20 cannons had been blown up into scrap metal after only one round of cannons, Tong jumped up in exasperation. Attack, attack, attack on all fronts. Whoever kills Yang Chendong will be heavily rewarded and given the title of nobility. Kill. As Tong shouted, the first echelon of the Siamese army rushed out from 4 directions. At the same time, the first echelon of the Siamese army also rushed out. In the dark night, a full-scale attack began. Attack, cover the area with cannons and machine guns. If the enemy is close, throw grenades. Don't let the enemy rush up the barren hills. Yang Chendong walked out of the trenches and shouted loudly. He had already heard the sound of iron horses galloping from all directions. He knew very well that the enemy had divided their forces. Since that was the case, his role in leading the cavalry out was very limited. Furthermore, in the dark, visibility was limited. The speed of the war horses was very fast. If they really rushed out, the danger would only increase. Therefore, he left his war horse in the trenches and walked into the trenches with a Type 95 in his hand. Following Yang Chendong's orders, the cannons began their counterattack. Since there were many enemies, no one knew how many enemies would be killed at any point of attack. The machine guns of the Type 95 squad did not stop for even a moment. They continuously shot out bullets, trying their best to destroy the approaching enemies and blast them away. The sound of gunshots was like firecrackers. Bullets were fired one after another, sweeping the enemy's bodies. At this moment, human lives were the most worthless thing. However, the Siamese army was already prepared. Although there were soldiers dying in the charge every moment, the charging troops did not have any intention of stopping. They continued to charge in an organized manner. When a group of people died, another group of people would rush up to replace them. Wave after wave of attacks, the Lu 5th Division on the barren hill finally showed signs of being overwhelmed. A few of the Type 95 squad machine guns had to take a short break because the barrels were too hot. The Siamese soldiers took this opportunity to charge up to the foot of the barren hill. Then, they strode into the barren hill. Blast them out. Dang Liming shouted to his comrades when he saw the enemy enter his formation. He took out a bayonet from his thigh and attached it to the Type 95. Then, he was the first to charge out of the trenches. He wanted to use his actions to tell the enemy that Ling Feng was not only good with guns, he was also good with bayonets. The regiment commander rushed out, and the other soldiers also flashed their bayonets one by one. They followed closely behind and pounced towards the enemy outside the trenches. Every soldier widened their eyes and used all of their strength to deliver a fatal shot to the enemy's chest according to the requirements of the assassination training. Use the grenades as cover. Suppress the enemy's charging momentum. The battalion commander behind Commander Dang Liming shouted as he pulled out a grenade from his waist and threw it forward. Immediately, there was a thunderous roar, and the Siamese soldiers roared as they repelled the enemy's attack. At the same time, Dang Liming took the lead and led a group of soldiers to kill the Siamese at the front and reclaim the position that they had lost. The machine guns that had been cooled down by cold water rang out again, suppressing the enemy's approach. This kind of repeated battle for positions happened many times that day. It was not until late at night when it started to drizzle that the Siamese troops stopped attacking. The battlefield became quiet again. Clean up the battlefield, check the injuries, and check the weapons and equipment. Xiao Yining, the commander of the Lu 5th Division, patiently walked in the trenches and passed down orders to the soldiers. Sometimes, he even reached out to help some of his comrades carry the bodies or bandage the wounds. Yang Chendong led 1,000 black knights and sat on the highest point of the barren mountain. From the beginning of the war until now, even when the trenches were about to be taken, they did not make a move. They had been conserving their strength because they knew that there would be more important tasks for them to complete. Sixth young master, the casualty statistics are out. After a day and a night of fighting, more than 400 soldiers of the 5th Division were killed, more than 1,000 were seriously injured, and 5,000 were injured. Xiao Yining said in a sobbing voice. For him, this was the biggest sacrifice he had made since he joined the Battle of the Cold Front. In the face of Xiao Yining's complaints, Yang Chendong did not reprimand nor did he console him. He only replied with 3 simple words, "Got it." After saying these words, he finally got up slowly and patted the white dragon horse beside him. "Old man, it's time for us to show our power. Are you ready?" Although it was only a warhorse, the white dragon seemed to be able to understand Yang Chendong's words. It could not help but raise its neck and neighed. This caused Yang Chendong to laugh out loud. "Alright, since you're ready, then let's have a big fight. Brothers, are you ready?" "We're ready." 1,000 black knights answered him in unison. Beta Persei was also standing among the black knights. After answering this sentence, he carefully took a few steps forward. "Sixth Master, why don't you not participate in this operation? Anything can happen on the battlefield." Yang Chendong already knew what Beta Persei was going to say. Without waiting for him to speak, he had already said, "There's no need to persuade me. The soldiers can fight with their lives on the line and be fearless. Why can't I? It's settled. We'll attack in 4 groups according to the plan." 1,000 black knights were divided into 4 groups. Yang Chendong, Beta Persei, 1st Brigade Leader Qiu Vi, and 2nd Brigade Leader Dao Xiao would each lead a group to attack. This was originally part of the plan. How could they change it at the last minute? Chapter 1032. Beta Persei had followed Yang Chendong for a long time and knew the temperament of the young master well. Most of the time, he was easy to talk to and listen to advice. However, once he made a decision, it was not something that could be changed at any time. Knowing that it was useless to persuade him, Beta Persei spoke to Badao Jiang and Pengyu, who were in Yang Chendong's team. "I'll leave the young master's safety to you. If anything happens, I'll kill you. Second brother, don't worry. Even if we die in battle, our souls will protect the 6th young master and bring him back safely." Badao Jiang and Pengyu said with a solemn expression. 1,000 people were divided into 4 teams, which meant that each team had about 250 people. Due to the rain, the Siamese soldiers had to rest and reorganize. When they stopped attacking, Yang Chendong personally led them to launch a counterattack. Before they set off, Yang Chendong said to Xiao Yining, "Cook immediately and take the time to rest. The soldiers are very tired after fighting for a day and a night. I'm afraid there will be more difficult battles waiting for us. The more energy we have, the more likely we will win. Sixth young master, don't worry. We will wait for your triumphant return. Hot meals will be waiting for you and the black cavalry." Xiao Yining stood straight and saluted. "Definitely." Yang Chendong's face revealed a confident smile. Then, he lightly clamped his legs and rode the white dragon horse in the direction of the retreating Siamese soldiers. The battle had been going on for a day and a night. Under the tense atmosphere, the Siamese soldiers were exhausted. Taking advantage of the light rain, they rested for a short while. From their point of view, the 5-star army was small in number and it was almost impossible for them to change the battle. They were tired and needed to rest. Their opponents should take this opportunity to lie down on the ground and rest. It was impossible for them to launch a counterattack and threaten the Siamese soldiers. Under such circumstances, the Siamese soldiers did not even bother to send out their sentries. In the dark night, the soldiers gathered in circles to cook. They enjoyed the warm meal in the rain to replenish the nutrients their bodies lacked. Just when the meal was ready and everyone was about to eat, the sound of galloping horses approached from afar. When the Siamese soldiers at the front heard it, they were all in disbelief. They did not believe that the 5-star army would take the initiative to cause them trouble. What right did they have? Regardless of whether they believed it or not, the cavalry of the 5-star troop was really here. Just as some of the vigilant Siamese soldiers stood up, a group of black figures emerged from the darkness. Under the light of the bonfire, the gleaming silver broadswords slashed at the frightened Siamese soldiers. The Siamese soldiers were unprepared for the sudden attack and suffered a great loss. Most of them were chopped in half and turned into corpses before they could even hold their weapons. A few lucky ones turned around and fled. They led the Black Knights to another camp and repeated the previous attack. Yang Chendong had always been at the front of his team. His physical fitness was already very good. No one could beat him in terms of both strength and toughness. In addition, the White Dragon was the king of horses. With the combination of the two, once he rushed out, no one could catch up to him. Naturally, he took the responsibility of being the tip of the arrow. His appearance was like a golden needle that quickly pierced into a person's body. Wherever he went, the Siamese soldiers, whether armed or unarmed, soldiers or generals, were no match for him. They were all killed with a single slash of his saber and fell to the ground with hatred in their hearts. Quick, keep up with him. Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu pushed their horses to their limits, but they were barely able to keep up with Yang Chendong. This made them extremely anxious, and at the same time, they used all of their strength. Every time their silver blade struck down, another soul would appear on the battlefield. Although there were only around 250 people, under Yang Chendong's lead, everyone forgot about this fact. All they thought about was constantly moving forward, constantly killing the enemy, and constantly killing the enemy. With such high morale, the cavalry of more than 200 men forced their way through 4 Siamese military camps, each of which had at least 1,000 soldiers. However, with the advantage in numbers, they could not fight back. They could only run with their instinct. After charging into the 5th camp, Yang Chendong finally felt a trace of weakness. The speed at which he swung his sword slowed down, allowing Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu, who were behind him, to catch up. Then, the two of them shouted, "Sixth young master, we have charged into the 5th camp. We have completed our mission. We can retreat now." "It's already the 5th camp?" Yang Chendong smiled as he thought about the plan to retreat after charging into 3 enemy camps. Then, he shouted, "The enemy is too easy to kill. They are completely defenseless. Let's charge into one more camp. No matter what the situation is, we will retreat. What do you think?" Even though Yang Chendong said it in a negotiating tone, his tone was firm. Ba Daojiang and Peng Yu could not say anything. They could only smile bitterly and follow behind Yang Chendong as they continued to charge forward. 2 hours later, Xiao Yining, the commander of the 5th Infantry Division, stood on a barren hill and looked into the distance. So much time had passed. Why had not a single shadow cavalry unit returned? Did something happen to them? Just as he was worrying, the sound of hooves could be heard from afar. Then, the first batch of retreating units appeared. It was the 4th unit led by Dao Shao. Their bodies reeked of blood, representing their achievements. When they retreated to the barren hill and saw that they were the first batch to retreat, he could not help but be shocked. "Sixth young master and the rest did not return?" "No, you are the first unit." Xiao Yining replied honestly. "What? That won't do. I have to go and receive them." This result shocked Dao Shao. He had already completed his mission to kill 3 enemy camps. That was why he had retreated. However, he had not seen a single unit return. This could only mean that they had completed their mission beyond their expectations. He hated himself for being too honest and obedient. He wanted to lead his unit out again. However, Xiao Yining took large strides forward and blocked Dao Zhao's warhorse. "No, it is so dark. You might not be able to find them. If every team that returns has to go look for the others, when will that ever end? Listen to my advice. Stay here and observe the situation first before making a decision. Furthermore, the soldiers must be tired and thirsty. Rest and replenish your energy." Even though Xiao Yining was the commander of a division and was leading the Cold Vanguard Division, his position was high. However, in front of the Black Knights and Long Wei, he was still extremely courteous. He knew that the other party was only inferior to him in terms of rank. In terms of influence, he would never be able to catch up. These words left Dao Xiao speechless. He thought that he could continue to kill, but the soldiers must be tired. He nodded and said, "All right, then let's grab some food. If there is a change in the situation, we will still have to go out." All right. Hurry up and bring the prepared hot food." Seeing that his advice was effective, Xiao Yining couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief and shouted loudly behind him. Not long after Dao Xiao, the leader of the 3rd unit, Qiu Vi, also returned with his men. He was also reeking of blood. Dao Xiao quickly ran over to ask about the results. When he found out that this unit had not only killed 3 but 4 battalions, he stomped his feet in regret. Not long after Qiu Vi returned, the leader of the 2nd unit, Beta Persei, also returned. He had killed 5 battalions. He thought that it was about time, but when he returned, he realized that the young master had not returned. He did not even want to eat and was about to turn around and rush back. However, he was stopped by Xiao Yining. "Second brother, even if your body is fine, you still have to consider the condition of the soldiers. You came back later than the other 2 units after killing 5 battalions. I'm sure the 6th young master must have killed more than 5 battalions. Why don't you eat something first and wait and see?" That's right, Chou Wu and Dao Xiao said. The starting point of departure was the same, and the speed of return was determined by the number of enemy battalions killed. In this case, it was very likely that the 6th young master would kill his way into the 6th battalion. In this case, the 6th young master's return should not be far away. All right. Beta Persei looked at the Dark Knight. He was also worried that he would not be able to find the young master if he went out now. He would also put his brothers in danger. Therefore, he decided to wait a little longer. This wait lasted for an hour. Beta Persei, who felt that a day was like a year, forced himself to drink a bowl of meat soup. Finally, he could not wait any longer. "No, it's been so long and the young master still hasn't returned. Something must have happened. We can't wait any longer. Yes, we can't wait any longer." This time, even Qiu Vi and Dao Xiao could not sit still. According to the time, even if the 6th young master had killed 6 battalions, he should have returned long ago. However, he still had not returned. Could it be that he had killed more enemies? Or did something happen? When they thought of the latter, who could still sit still? First, they were the Black Knights, then the Long Wei. They were responsible for ensuring the absolute safety of the 6th young master. In a sense, they were equivalent to the emperor's personal army. Naturally, they were incomparably prestigious. However, this prestige was based on the fact that Yang Chendong was fine. If something really happened, they would not be able to bear the responsibility even if they all died 10 times over. Xiao Yining did not dare to stop them. After an extra hour, he had already lost his confidence. If it was not for the fact that he did not have a warhorse to ride, he would have asked to go out and fight. "Men, each unit take out 200 Type 95 weapons and give them to the Black Cavalry." The only thing Xiao Yining could do was to donate the weapons. No matter what, it would be considered a contribution. Chapter 1033. Wait a minute. Just as Xiao Yining issued the task, Beta Persei, who was already on his horse, raised his middle finger and gestured for silence. Then, on the quiet barren mountain, almost everyone heard the sound of horse hooves stomping on the ground. It was getting closer and closer, becoming clearer and clearer. Young master is back. It must be the young master. Beta Persei couldn't help but cry out, his childlike face full of joy. It was Yang Chendong. At this moment, his golden battle robe had long been dyed blood red. When he saw Beta Persei and the others at the foot of the barren mountain from afar, he squeezed out a smile even though he was a little tired. Everyone must be anxious from waiting. This time I violated the military order, it's my responsibility. Yang Chendong had set an example by apologizing as soon as he arrived. With his status, he had to admit that he had done something wrong. He believed that in the future, other officials, no matter how high their ranks were, would have to have an attitude when they did something wrong. Young master, are you okay? But at this moment, no one took his self-reflection seriously. Everyone was really concerned about whether Yang Chendong's body had any problems and whether he was injured. I'm fine. I just killed a little too ruthlessly. 2 of my brothers were injured, but fortunately, I checked on them on the way. It's not fatal. They'll be fine after some rest. Yang Chendong grinned and laughed. This was the strength of the Shadow Cavalry. They were covered in protective armor, and so were their warhorses. Unless they were trapped and died of exhaustion or stripped of their armor, it would be extremely difficult to kill them. This was also the main reason why Yang Chendong dared to split them into 4 teams to counterattack with only 1,000 Shadow Cavalry. Facts also proved that there were no casualties in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th teams. Some were only injured by the shock. When they heard that Yang Chendong was fine and only 2 of his comrades were slightly injured, everyone laughed. Then Beta Persei couldn't help but ask curiously, "Young master, you came back so late. How many enemy camps did you break through?" Faced with this question that everyone was curious about, Yang Chendong didn't answer. Instead, he dismounted from his white dragon warhorse and went to find something to eat and drink. Yang Chendong didn't want to answer, and no one dared to ask. However, Badao Jiang and Peng Yu who were following behind him didn't receive such treatment. Beta Persei and the others quickly surrounded them. In the end, the 2 couldn't stand the interrogation and answered the question. The 6th young master was so focused on killing that he didn't take it seriously even when we reminded him several times. Later, if it wasn't for the fact that the warhorse was carrying too much weight, he probably wouldn't have come back. Badao Jiang said casually, but he still didn't answer the question. For a moment, Beta Persei and the others were angry. They rolled up their sleeves and looked like they were really going to fight. Peng Yu was more reliable. He first smiled and then replied, 8th Battalion. What? 8th Battalion. Hearing this answer, Beta Persei and the others were stunned. Their 3 teams combined had only broken through 12 battalions. The 6th young master's team had broken through 8 battalions. Didn't this mean that he had completed nearly 300% of the mission? And that was the truth. When Yang Chendong saw that the Siamese army was unprepared, he went on a killing spree and broke through battalions one after another. Finally, he reached 8 battalions before returning. With a team of more than 200 people, he had broken through the Siamese army's 8,000 soldiers. Obviously, he had created another miracle. The 5-star army was shocked by Yang Chendong's excitement. Then, there were sounds of surprise. The commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining, did a rough calculation. The 4 teams together were equivalent to breaking through 20 battalions of the enemy. That was a total of 20,000 soldiers. The Siamese army had suffered such heavy losses and would not be able to recover for a while. So, could his soldiers rest for the night? For this request, Yang Chendong waved his hand and approved it. Take the time to rest. The enemy needs time to prepare. But with such heavy losses, I'm afraid that the attack tomorrow morning will be even fiercer. Rest well for the big battle. Rest well for the big battle. At this moment, all the soldiers of the 5-star army shouted in unison. The morale of the 5-star army was high and the crowd was furious. Tong Si was burning with anger and could not suppress it. When he heard that in just 4 hours, they had lost 20 battalions of soldiers, nearly 10,000 dead, countless injured, and countless deserters, he could not believe his ears. During the day, the 5-star army showed signs of weakness. There were even a few times when his soldiers were at the foot of a barren mountain. Victory was in sight. How could the enemy have the strength to retaliate? General, could it be that the enemy's reinforcements have arrived? You also know that if Yang Chendong is here, the other 5-element armies will definitely rush here like crazy. A deputy general also couldn't figure it out, so he made a guess. Bullsh *T. I have already arranged countless scouts around the perimeter of the battlefield. Even if there are reinforcements, we should be the first to know. However, there is no news at all. Could it be that their reinforcements didn't come from the ground, but from the sky? Tong De shouted angrily. This. The others in the main tent did not say anything. They could not explain this matter. Everything was up to General Tong Si. Tong Si could not figure it out. But his intuition told him that the 5-star army's counterattack was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Otherwise, they would not have stopped at 20 battalions. They would have killed their way to his main tent. In other words, he still had the advantage in numbers. If he wanted to win this battle, he could only continue with this advantage. All of you, go to the battalions immediately and calm the soldiers down. We will launch the attack tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take Yang Chendong's life this time. Suwon City, on top of the city wall. The deputy governor of Cambodia, Din Din Wei, and the Cambodian general, Dagan, were looking towards the southwest. After Yang Chendong left the city, no one dared to attack Suwon City. In fact, in order to achieve an absolute advantage in numbers, the Siamese soldiers who were guarding the city were all mobilized. In other words, Suwon City was really safe at this moment. Yang Chendong was indeed in danger. The sound of cannons had been heard since the night before. It had been 2 days and 2 nights. Although they were far away and could not see what the 5-star army had been through, the sounds of fighting and killing had not stopped. It was easy to imagine that the 5-star army was not having a good time. Yang Chendong had also been in danger. General Dagan, how many soldiers can we gather in the city? Din Din Wei looked into the distance for a long time and finally could not help but ask. Sai, Deputy Governor, I know what you mean, but we only have about 1,000 soldiers in the city, and half of them are injured. If we rely on them, we can't even defend the city. If we really go out to help, the Siamese soldiers will attack the city at any time. If that's the case, I don't think the 6th young master wants to see. Dagan sighed. As a general, he certainly did not want to watch others fight. But with his current strength, there was nothing he could do. These words extinguished Ding Ding Wei's courage that had just arisen. So, we can only watch? No, didn't the 6th young master say that we have enough soldiers in the city? He wants us to prepare enough troops in the city to clean up the battlefield at any time and snatch the supplies that the enemy will leave behind. This is also a very important task. When Dagan said this, he felt a little lacking in confidence. The Siamese soldiers had mobilized more than 100,000 soldiers and reinforcements were still coming. It would be very difficult for Yang Chendong to escape, let alone defeat the enemy. Din Din Wei could hear the disappointment in Dagan's words. He said confidently, we have to believe in the 6th young master. He is a man who likes to create miracles. Besides, after his arrival, our people's lives have been better than before. Compared to His Majesty Boromir, he is more suitable to lead us, isn't he? Yes, that's right, we need to mobilize now. We need to mobilize the people in the city. We just need to wait for 6th young master to win the battle and capture the captives. This. Dagon originally wanted to ask if this would work. But when he saw how serious Din Din Wei was, he nodded. Then, let's go and prepare. 20 miles away from Golden Rim City, a cavalry team was coming. The leader was Major General Tian Hu, who usually had a cold face and was serious in speech and manner. After coming ashore from Baji Port, he led the world's #1 cavalry division and traveled day and night without rest. Even when they were eating, they had to eat while riding their horses. Finally, they arrived at Golden Rim City. However, it had been 2 days and 2 nights since the Siamese army besieged the 6th young master. How far is it from here to Suwang City? Tian Hu asked Lu Duo, who was beside him, as he rode forward. Commander, it is about 400 miles away. Lu Duo had already familiarized himself with the map before coming, so he answered without hesitation. It is still so far away. No, we are still too slow. Hearing that it would take more than a day, Tian Hu shook his head and expressed his dissatisfaction. It is already very fast. After all, we still have a lot of things with us. Lu Duo explained after listening. The world's #1 cavalry division dominated the beginning city and the North Desert region. They were similar to the roaming cavalry. There was no fixed training ground at all. Often, they would fight wherever they went. Especially when they encountered unknown cavalry, they would immediately enter the opportunity to train. Therefore, they usually brought a lot of things, such as food and water. It should be known that a large part of the grassland was desert. If there was not enough water, it was easy to get hungry and thirsty, leading to a decline in combat strength. Chapter 1034. There was also the quiver. Compared to an ordinary cavalry that only had a quiver with 50 arrows, the soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry division had 20 quiver with 1,000 arrows. This was because they were used to doing things without supplies, so they had to be self-sufficient. In addition, there were clothes, shoes, hats, bows, extra sabers, and so on. Fortunately, each of them had 2 horses, so they could carry such heavy loads. However, this greatly reduced their speed. Now that the 6th young master was in danger, as the closest reinforcements, the #1 cavalry division in the world had to rush over as quickly as possible. Even if they arrived 30 minutes earlier, they might be able to change many things. Leave 200 people in each division and lead the extra horses slowly. The rest of you should speed up. Other than the necessary weapons and rations, leave everything else behind. Our top priority is to rush over with all our might. Tian Hu took a deep breath and immediately made a decision. Lu Duo only hesitated for a moment before giving a military salute. Then, he began to pass down orders to the messenger behind him. Immediately, the 1st Cavalry Division, which originally had 10,000 people, was left with 800 people. At the same time, they also left behind 10,800 war horses and a bunch of supplies. Without any restraints, Tian Hu, who had only brought rations for a day, acted as if he would either succeed or die for a righteous cause. He had already used his actions to tell everyone that they had to rush over to the location to rescue the 6th young master. Otherwise, they would run out of food first. The 9,200 cavalry troops advanced quickly. Everywhere they passed, clouds of smoke and dust would rise, giving people the feeling that they were riding on a cloud of dust. On the barren mountain, because of the sneak attack, they managed to obtain half a night to rest. When the sun rose the next day, the crazy attacks began again. As if considering the factor of long delays, Tong Si once again gave an iron order that they could only advance and not retreat. At the same time, the reward for killing Yang Chendong was increased from 10,000 silver taels to 20,000 silver taels. To an ordinary soldier, this was definitely a heaven-shaking sum. It was equivalent to being able to rise from the poor class to the upper class, and not having to worry about food and water for the rest of their lives. This also greatly increased the morale and enticement of the soldiers. Even though they knew that the 5-star army possessed extremely miraculous and formidable firearms, the soldiers were still as numerous as the clouds in the sky. Often, after a batch of soldiers was shot down, a new batch would appear immediately. From the looks of it, if the soldiers of the late Qing dynasty had such morale, they wouldn't have allowed the 8-nation alliance to invade. Facing such an attack, 5th Master Lu was also undergoing the harshest test. Their ammunition consumption was too fast, and without enough supplies, they were already stretched thin. Of course, the most important thing was that the enemy's charge was too fierce. Many of the muskets had to be used continuously, and the chances of them having problems were greatly increased. For example, misfiring, jamming, or overloading of the musket, causing it to not be able to fire, occurred repeatedly. Originally, 5th Master Lu only had 1 musket each and did not have many spare muskets. Thus, he had no choice but to pick up a bayonet and go into battle bare-chested. It must be said that the Lengfeng soldiers were not bad with their muskets, and their close combat abilities were also very strong. Once they were back-to-back and formed a 3x3 formation, the 3 of them could easily kill enemies several times their number. Unfortunately, the number of enemies they faced this time was too much, and it was not just several times their number. After 3 days of battle, the Siamese soldiers had already suffered tens of thousands of casualties, which was a few thousand times the number of casualties of the 5-star army. However, when the muskets could no longer display their advantage, the number of casualties began to decrease. At around 10 in the morning, the firearms started to have problems on a large scale. By the time they switched to close combat at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a total of 3 hours and 3 hours had passed. The number of casualties in the 5th Army had exceeded 1,000. What was even more frightening was that this number was still increasing. If it wasn't for Yang Chendong bringing the Black Knights and the Dragon Guards to join in and kill the enemy from time to time, the barren mountain might not have been able to be defended. Such a loss had never happened since the establishment of the Lengfeng army. However, no one complained. When they became the glorious soldiers of the Lengfeng army, they were destined to bear the same amount of pressure. For example, in the face of danger, they were expected to face death with equanimity. Use grenades when there are more people, and bayonets when there are fewer people. Those who can use muskets, please be prepared to cooperate. Please don't be a hero, don't fight alone, and don't casually save people, 5th Master Lu Division Xiao Yining said as he almost cried. Just now, he didn't know how many heroic soldiers had taken the initiative to charge at the enemy, and then fought one against many, hundreds, and finally died on the battlefield. He also saw that in order to save these lone heroes, many soldiers had charged into the enemy camp like moths to a flame. After entering, they never came out again. These were all good warriors. Even in the face of death, they did not flinch. He was happy to be their commander, but at the same time, he was sad for their sacrifice. However, war was cruel to begin with. Once on the battlefield, one had to be prepared to die on the battlefield. Perhaps this was the fate of some soldiers. However, as a division commander, it was better to have one less person die. It could be said that the Lengfeng army had undergone all kinds of training in the past, including winning with fewer people and bullying with more people. However, they really didn't have much training in using cold weapons to fight with fewer people. Perhaps everyone subconsciously thought that this kind of thing wouldn't happen. Thus, when faced with such a situation, there was some confusion. Division Commander Xiao Yining shouted at the top of his lungs. Under the cooperation of the other commanders, 5th Master Lu Division began to withdraw their forces. At the same time, they also gave up their territory on the outskirts of the barren mountain. Standing on the barren mountain, Yang Chendong didn't stop this from happening. This was because he knew that 5th Master Lu Division wasn't giving up on the battle. Instead, they were welcoming the arrival of a greater victory with a better posture. At 2 in the afternoon, the enemy's large-scale attack began again. From afar, the figures were densely packed. Based on a rough estimate, there were at least 30 to 40,000 soldiers. They relied on their numbers and shouted as they charged forward. In the face of the locust-like enemy, the remaining 6,000 soldiers of the 5th Division were not afraid at all. First, they threw out the last grenades in their hands, forcefully blasting a hole in the enemy's formation. Then, they began a frenzied counterattack. With companies as units, they stabbed forward like many sharp knives, forcefully suppressing the enemy's advance. "Get on your horses and attack." Seeing this scene, Yang Chendong knew that it was time for him to counterattack. He immediately leaped onto the white dragon horse and rushed out in a blood-red battle robe. Beside him and behind him were 1,000 black knights and dragon guards. They also raised their steel swords and rushed towards the enemy while shouting and yelling. Facing the densely packed enemy, the cavalry's charging force was limited. If they were caught in the crossfire, they would become the target of public criticism. There would be no possibility of retreat or even survival. But at this moment, no one showed any intention of retreating. To be a member of the Black Cavalry, one had to be extremely loyal. They usually enjoyed the respect of others, and now, it was time for them to pay the same price. 1,000 Black Cavalry dragon guards charged into the enemy's camp. First, they killed their way into the enemy's camp. Then, they were scattered and surrounded. Finally, their armor was riddled with holes. The so-called invulnerable black armor had served its purpose. It could no longer protect the Black Cavalry dragon guards, and they became the targets of the Siamese soldiers. The sun gradually set in the west and the sky finally turned dark again. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor, Nyoibo Studio. The arrival of night hindered the Siamese army's attack. Yang Chendong and his men could finally take a breather. When they returned to the barren hills and were panting, new casualties were reported. 5th Master Lu Division had less than 4,000 soldiers left. Even the Black Cavalry had less than 800 men left. Even the Black Cavalry had lost more than 200 men. This showed the cruelty of the battle. Their deaths will not be in vain. Their deaths laid the foundation for our greater victory. Their deaths were worthy, and honorable. Yang Chendong said and did so at the same time. He requested for a list of all the soldiers who died in the battle to be given to him. All of them would be treated as martyrs so that their families and loved ones would be taken care of. To paraphrase Yang Chendong's words, we cannot let the heroes bleed and shed tears. We cannot let their souls not rest in peace. We must let them pass away peacefully without any worries or scruples. Long live the 6th young master. More than 4,000 soldiers knelt on the ground and kowtowed to Yang Chendong, to the god in their hearts. Morale was still high. Many soldiers showed an attitude of facing death as they waited for the next bloody battle to come. At that time, they might fall and never get up again. But they had nothing to regret. This was their fate. There was nothing to worry about because everything had been arranged for them by the 6th young master. The soldiers were not afraid of death, but some were afraid of Yang Chendong's death. Xiao Yining and Beta Persei walked up to Yang Chendong together and made a request with a serious expression. In the next battle, they would try their best to charge and kill their way out of the encirclement. Break out? That's impossible. After understanding the meaning of the two, Yang Chendong shook his head with a bitter smile. If he knew that Yang Chendong would have such an attitude, Xiao Yining would not have cared about his status and said firmly, 6th young master, we are not asking for your opinion. We are informing you of this decision. Are you going to force me out? Yang Chendong saw that Xiao Yining was serious, so he pretended to be angry and his face darkened. Chapter 1035. Don't blame Commander Xiao, this is also the opinion of all of us in Longwei. Our duty is to protect your absolute safety. Now that there is danger, the young master must leave. There is no room for discussion. Beta Persei spoke up. He, who had always followed Yang Chendong's lead, finally became the bad guy for once and offered his opinion. Since Beta Persei had made such a statement, Yang Chendong knew that it would be difficult to refuse. A thought came to his mind, and he asked, since we are breaking out of the encirclement, where should we go? Now that Wang Shan is also injured and the radio is damaged, we don't know where our troops are and where the danger is. Once we rush out, what should we do if we get surrounded again? At that time, our reinforcements won't even know where we are. What should they do then? Won't it be even more dangerous? When the battle was at its cruelest, the telegrapher Wang Shan also joined the battle. However, because his strength was limited, he was killed and carried back. Not only that, but the radio was also damaged and could not be used for a while. Yang Chendong could naturally solve all of this. For example, he could take out another radio from the warehouse and then send a report to the outside to inquire about the situation. However, he did not do so. He also wanted to see what the other armies would choose to do when they did not hear from him. This was often the best time to test people's hearts. He did not expect that this method of testing others would become an excuse. It was an excellent excuse to not be forced to break out of the encirclement. Beta Persei and Xiao Yining only thought about how to ensure Yang Chendong's safety and did not think about what to do after they got out. Now that they were asked this question, they did not know what to say. However, Yang Chendong still had a relaxed smile on his face and said, "Well, you have to believe in yourselves and our army. I promise that as long as we can hold on, the reinforcements will arrive by tomorrow at the latest. At that time, it will be time for us to fight back with all our strength." The reinforcements will arrive tomorrow? Beta Persei and Xiao Yining looked shocked. At the same time, they also had a question to ask. How did Yang Chendong find out about the radio station without it? However, they wouldn't say anything like that, nor did they dare to say anything. Yes, the reinforcements will arrive tomorrow. Yang Chendong said as if there was something important. Of course, he wouldn't say that he was just guessing. In fact, he didn't know where the reinforcements were. Everything was just a guess. He just wanted to cheer everyone up so that they wouldn't lose hope. If the reinforcements did not arrive the next day, that would be easy too. They could just push it back by one day. After all, the effect of the pep talk would take effect. Others did not know that this was all a guess. Looking at Yang Chendong's confident demeanor, Beta Persei and Xiao Yining retreated with joy. Then, the news that reinforcements would arrive after a day of defending spread, and morale rose again. Tong Si did not know when the reinforcements from the 5-star army would arrive. However, he had a feeling that they were not far away. It had been more than 10 days since the attack on Suwang City and the Barren Mountain. The 5-star army should have made their move by now. If he couldn't take down Yang Chendong, he was afraid that he would lose this great opportunity. Not only that, he might fall into a passive position. The number of 5-star army in the Barren Mountain had been determined. There were less than 10,000 people. However, he had led hundreds of thousands of troops to fight for many days. So far, the number of dead and injured had reached 70 to 80,000, but they still hadn't been taken down. A 5-star army of nearly 10,000 people was already so powerful. What if another one came? He didn't dare to think about what the consequences would be. Pass down the order. Have a good rest tonight and attack with all your strength tomorrow morning. No matter what, we must take down Yang Chendong. Also, all the battalions must be prepared for a sneak attack. Once the enemy comes, they won't be able to return. Tong Si didn't choose to attack at night. He was worried that once the 5-star army broke through in the dark, their vision would be affected. In order to not let Yang Chendong escape, he had to make the decision to let the enemy rest for another night. Yang Chendong, who was at the foot of the barren mountain, didn't know that the Siamese soldiers wouldn't attack tonight. Late into the night, there was still no movement from the enemy. Yang Chendong finally said, "Did you see that? The enemy has already expected us to break through, so they didn't choose to attack at night. Okay, now everyone can have a good rest." Beta Persei and Xiao Yining both had bitter expressions. They knew that if they broke through during the day, the danger would be greater. After all, the barren mountain had been completely surrounded. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that not even a bird could fly out. Even so, they could only place their hopes on the reinforcements that would arrive tomorrow. Will there really be reinforcements? Who will they be? This question appeared in the hearts of many people, but no one asked because it was tantamount to questioning the sixth young master's words. This was a political issue. Yang Chendong leaned against a boulder and slept for the night. In his dream, he saw his wives and little Lele. He saw little Lele happily hugging his neck and kissing him on the cheek. He also saw first Madame Hu Yan, who was already pregnant. When he carefully leaned his head over, he first heard the faint sound of the baby breathing. Then, it became louder and louder, until it became a very loud dong, 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 trembling sound. It seemed that at this moment, the earth was trembling with it. Young master, while he was in a daze, Beta Persei's voice suddenly sounded, and then his body shook. Yang Chendong instinctively opened his eyes, and Beta Persei's wide-eyed face appeared in his line of sight. Seeing that Yang Chendong had woken up, Beta Persei said happily, "Young master, you're really amazing. The reinforcements are here, the reinforcements are here. The reinforcements are here?" Yang Chendong was also shocked by this news, and when he wanted to say something, the sound of armored horses trampling on the ground entered his ears. He finally knew where the sound in his dream came from. It was precisely because of this that Yang Chendong's eyes widened. How many reinforcements are here? Which team is it? I don't know yet, and I can't see clearly, but it should be the reinforcements. Young master, look, the Siamese army that was about to attack has become chaotic. Beta Persei pointed to the distance at the foot of the barren mountain and said reasonably. Binoculars. Yang Chendong said as he took the binoculars from Chiu Vi, the captain of the first guard company, and looked at them. The reinforcements are here, and they seem to be very strong. In this case, immediately inform the entire army to prepare for a full counterattack. We need to attack from the center and attack from both sides. Looking through the binoculars, Yang Chendong saw the commotion in the enemy camp, and at this moment, he was extremely excited. He did not think that the Siamese army still needed to put on such a show at this time. Faced with only half the number of people, and his condition was not very good, they could attack with just a burst of energy. It was meaningless to put on such a show now. In fact, the reinforcements were indeed here, and it was the 1st Cavalry Division that had arrived. After removing all the burden, Tian, who led the main force of the 1st Cavalry Division, 9,200 people, and traveled more than 400 miles in 1 day and 1 night, arriving at the barren mountain outside Suwon City. Seeing that the sky was about to brighten, Tian, who gave everyone an hour to rest, and then said to the 5 regimental commanders, "If there are no major changes, the 6th young master is on the barren mountain in the distance. This battle will be the time for the 1st Cavalry Division to show the strongest combat power. I hope everyone can do their best, because all the 5-star army is watching us, because the 6th young master is on the barren mountain, watching us." Is everyone confident? It was only 1 day and 1 night of continuous travel. This was not the first time for the 1st Cavalry Division under the heavens. There was even a time when they traveled continuously for more than 3 days and 3 nights, but when faced with an enemy, they still did not rest, and won in a spurt of energy. This time, they were going to help the 6th young master, so there was no possibility of them backing down. It was mentioned before that the first 3 regimental commanders of the 1st Cavalry Division were all captives. To be able to hold such a high position, it was all because of Yang Chendong's magnanimity. Even if it was to repay his kindness, everyone had to perform well this time. In other words, even without Tianhu's words, they would still do their best to perform. There are too many enemies, don't split up. Later, all of you will gather in a fan-shaped charge. At the same time, pay close attention to the position of the enemy's commander. If you find anything, immediately notify us. Tianhu knew the principle of capturing the leader first to capture the bandits. Yes. The 5 regimental commanders agreed without hesitation. Then, they turned around to notify the other regimental commanders, and at the same time, replenished their food supplies. At this moment, all the food they brought was swallowed. They knew very well that they did not know when the next battle would end, and they did not know when their next meal would be. Now, they were all prepared to not return until they won. Half an hour later, the 9,200 cavalrymen were ready to charge. Under the command of their division commander, Tianhu, they suddenly appeared and charged diagonally into the battlefield, charging towards the unprepared Siamese infantry. In history, there was a saying that the Jurchens were invincible. However, when they faced the 1st Cavalry Division, when they appeared and launched a frenzied attack, the Siamese soldiers were stunned by the cavalry that appeared out of nowhere. In the past few days, the number of 5-star army soldiers on the barren hills had decreased, but they had also paid a heavy price for it. In the face of the most advanced continuous fire rifles, the others were afraid that they wouldn't be able to avoid them. However, under General Tong's orders and the threat of the inspectors, they had no choice but to use their bodies to block the bullet holes. This made them very puzzled and angry. Now that the 5-star army cavalry had appeared behind them, the first thing they charged at was the inspector brigade, which gave them hope of escaping. Chapter 1036. Although the reward was high, one had to be alive to claim it. After witnessing the power of the 5-star army, the desire to claim the reward faded. It was only because they had no other choice but to make this choice. Now that they had a chance to save their lives, the Siamese soldiers, who were already demoralized, turned their swords around and ran away. Yes, they ran. Faced with the sudden appearance of the world's number 1 cavalry division, most of the Siamese soldiers did not even have the courage to fight. They only knew that the only way to survive had been opened. All they needed to do now was to follow the flow and escape with their lives. With such a mindset and such a general trend, the number 1 cavalry division in the world didn't encounter any resistance at all. There were even many places where the enemy retreated like the tide before they even arrived. The speed at which these people fled was actually not much slower than their warhorses. What should we do? The 4th Regiment commander, Bai Shuang, was riding beside Tianhu. How about this, Regiment Commander Bai, you lead your men to the barren mountains and report our plan to the 6th young master. I will lead the others to continue the pursuit and try to kill the enemy's general. Tianhu hesitated for a moment before he spoke. Okay, I will do it now. 4th Regiment, come with me. Bai Shuang nodded and left with the order. Leaving Tianhu behind, Bai Shuang led the rest of the cavalry and continued to charge forward. During the process, they kept waving their swords and killing the enemy. Blood and broken limbs were scattered all over the place. On the barren mountain, Bai Shuang arrived with 1,900 cavalrymen. From afar, he saw Yang Chendong riding on a white dragon, waiting for the battle. Immediately, he leaped off his horse and ran a few steps towards Yang Chendong. Student Bai Shuang is late. Sorry for startling you. Bai Shuang was once a student of Yang Chendong's academy. He was not personally taught by Yang Chendong, so he could not be called a teacher. However, it was not wrong to call him Dean. It's Regiment Commander Bai. Has the world's 1st Division arrived? After seeing White Shuang, the last trace of suspicion that the Siamese soldiers were putting on an act disappeared. The world's 1st Cavalry Division would never cooperate with the enemy to put on a show. Headmaster, Teacher Tian is leading the main force of the army to kill the enemy. He has sent a student to protect the headmaster. Bai Shuang's voice rang out again. Good, you guys are very good. I'm very pleased that you're fast enough. However, you've already killed your way out, so how can I just watch from the sidelines? Men, follow the young master and charge out. Beta Persei, fire the red signal flare. It's time to inform Ding Ding Wei and General De N, ha ha ha. Finally, the reinforcements had arrived. Now, it was time for him to shed his blood. At this moment, Yang Chendong felt his entire body brimming with energy. A red signal flare immediately rose into the air, causing Ding Ding Wei and De N, who were waiting for news on the tower, to see it. Immediately, the 20,000 corpse-collecting soldiers in the city opened the city gate and rushed toward the battlefield. At the same time, on top of the barren hill, except for the 500 who were too seriously injured to move, more than 4,000 people rushed out and cooperated with Commander Bai Shuang. This group of more than 6,000 people headed towards the Siamese camp from another direction. In the main tent of the Siamese army, Tong Si was still anxiously waiting for the arrival of good news. However, what he received was not news of the barren mountain being conquered or Yang Chendong being captured. Instead, he received news of the arrival of the 5-star army's reinforcements. As soon as they appeared, they defeated the main force of the Siamese army and were now heading toward the main tent. What's going on? What's going on? How can the reinforcements of the 5-star army arrive so quickly? Tong Si shouted hysterically. At this moment, it was obvious that he did not want to believe that all of this was true. However, the truth was the truth. It would not be false just because one did not want to believe it. After a few captains rushed into the main tent to report the battle situation, Tong Si finally knew that this time, they had really lost. Not only did he lose the opportunity to capture Yang Chendong, but it was also very likely that he would be defeated because of this. If he had escaped a little slower, his life would have been in danger. Retreat. In desperation, Tong Si had no choice but to issue such a military order. What Tong Si did not know was that the generals below him were already afraid of the 5-star army. According to them, the 5-star army's reinforcements numbered in the tens of thousands. Therefore, it was impossible for them to defeat them. Otherwise, with Tong Si's 60,000 soldiers, it was completely possible for him to compete with the 1st Cavalry Division. Once an army lost its fighting spirit, it was no better than an organized group of civilians. When the order to retreat was given, the camp immediately became chaotic. Everyone fought to leave, and all the generals asked the ration officer for food. Food had to be eaten mouthful by mouthful, roads had to be taken step by step, and tasks had to be done one by one. When faced with so many generals asking for food, the ration officer was confused. When he strongly urged everyone to line up and distribute the food, saying that it would take at least 1 to 3 days to complete, the generals could not accept it. Some of them even started to fight for the food. Before they met the enemy, the Siamese army was already in a mess. It was a pity that Tong Si had already retreated, so he didn't have the ability to distribute or preside over the overall situation. When the 1st Heavenly Cavalry Division arrived at the main camp, all they saw was a mountain of rations that had yet to be distributed. Leave 200 men to guard the granary. The rest of you, follow me to kill the enemy. After unexpectedly obtaining these rations, Tian who didn't show much joy on his face. His target was the enemy's commander, Tong Si. As long as he captured this person, this battle would be considered complete in his eyes. The 1st Cavalry Division continued their pursuit. Along the way, all the enemies they encountered surrendered. Very few people had the courage to fight. As a result, the entire battlefield was filled with scenes of the Siamese soldiers surrendering. Fortunately, Ding Ding Wei and De En arrived quickly and took over the job, preventing the situation from becoming even more chaotic. From this point alone, it was clear that Yang Chendong had foresight. It seemed that he had expected this scene a few days ago. While Tian Hu was advancing bravely, Yang Chendong arrived at the battlefield with more than 6,000 soldiers. Without the supervision of the Inspector Brigade, the Siamese soldiers who had been charging ferociously were now in a state of disarray. They were no longer as brave as before. Instead, they knelt down and threw down their weapons to surrender. Faced with these people who were no longer resisting, Yang Chendong did not give the order to kill them. Instead, he put away their weapons and sent people to watch over them. This was a job that could allow him to take in many captives. This greatly slowed down his progress and caused him to lose sight of Tong Si's fleeing figure. The 1st Cavalry Division also encountered the same problem. There were too many Siamese soldiers surrendering along the way. If these people were not controlled, who knew if they would escape back to Siam and become soldiers again? "Commander, what should we do?" 1st Regiment Commander Temu looked at the ground full of captives and asked worriedly. "Stop the pursuit and clean up the battlefield." Although he was hesitant, Tian Hu finally gave the order. He could not ignore the tens of thousands of captives in front of him. If these people caused any disasters, he would become a sinner. Tong Si never expected that the ferocious 5-star army would have to give up the pursuit due to the large number of captives. This allowed him to successfully escape from Cambodia and return to Siam. It was said that along the way, he encountered nearly 100,000 Siamese soldiers who rushed to reinforce him. They were all persuaded to return. Tong escaped, but even more soldiers were forced to surrender because they didn't have warhorses. In order to preserve their lives, they were forced to surrender. According to the statistics after the battle, there were more than 50,000 captives in this battle. There were also countless military supplies and provisions. The battle to defend Suwon City and the danger of being surrounded by barren hills was finally resolved. It seemed like they had effectively blocked the attack of the Siamese army and the 5-star army had turned the tables. However, in Yang Chendong's view, this was far from the end. This was just the beginning. In front of the city gates of Suwon City, there were corpses covered in white cloth. A total of 4,854 soldiers of the 5th Division and the Black Knights had died. At this moment, they were all lying here. Many of them could not be found for various reasons. The only things that were covered were the items they used daily. Revenge! 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 The entire city gate was filled with shouts. They were all soldiers of the 5th Division. This time, they had lost half of their division and were almost crippled. Everyone was suppressing the anger in their hearts. There were less than 800 Black Knights and Dragon Guards left. They stood to the left and right of Yang Chendong. None of them made a sound, but from their eyes, which revealed their armor, they were filled with intense killing intent. It was obvious that they were also extremely sad at this moment. "Good, then we will take revenge. Men, bring the prisoners here," Yang Chendong said in accordance with the soldier's voice. After the order was given, 4,854 Siamese soldiers walked out under the escort of the 1st Cavalry Division. These people were all prisoners of war, and they were the kind that did not admit defeat. Even in the prison camp, they were still shouting about their identity as Siamese soldiers. They were still shouting that one day when they returned to the army, they would come back to Cambodia and teach the 5-star army a lesson. Yang Chendong didn't have time to do their ideological work. He didn't even mention the matter of re-education through labor. It just so happened that a large memorial service was going to be held for the dead comrades. These people were put to use. They were tied up with ropes one by one and brought out like sugar-coated haws. There were nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners outside the city. There were hundreds of thousands of people in Suwon City who watched this scene. They watched as the 4,854 prisoners of war were brought out. They watched as Beta Persei used his naturally loud voice to recite the names of the dead comrades. Chapter 1037. There were nearly 5,000 names, and it would take some time to recite all of them. Even though Yang Er's speed was not slow, it still took him 4 hours. During this time, there was no other sound outside the city except for the sound of the wind. Everyone was listening attentively, as if every name that was called out was imprinted in their hearts. When the last name was read out, in front of everyone, Yang Chendong raised his right hand and said loudly, invading without a reason, a life for a life. Today, these people are sentenced to death and will be executed immediately. Guards, kill! Kill! More than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division shouted in unison. Kill! Nearly 800 black cavalry soldiers shouted in unison. Kill! 10,000 soldiers of the 1st Cavalry Division shouted in unison. Kill! More than 200,000 people on the city gate tower shouted in unison. The sound of killing shook the heavens, and nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners trembled in fear. Some of the more timid ones could no longer stand and fell to the ground. Under the sound of killing, 454 Siamese soldiers were executed. Their mouths were gagged in advance, so when they died, they did not make a single sound. No one knew if they had admitted their mistake at this moment, or if they wanted to continue cursing. But these were no longer important. What was important was that they were dead and could no longer pose any threat to the 5-star army. Since ancient times, many people had said that killing prisoners of war was an ominous thing. But this time, when Yang Chendong ordered the prisoners to be killed, no one made a different sound. Firstly, they were not prisoners at all. They were just enemies who had temporarily lost their ability to fight. Secondly, the souls of the 5th Division, especially the Black Cavalry, had to be avenged. These people should have died on the battlefield long ago. It was not a bad thing to make use of them. The machete fell, and 4,054 heads fell to the ground. Nearly 50,000 Siamese prisoners had completely lost their will to fight. At this moment, they suddenly understood how precious life was and how lucky they were. With the deaths of these people, the 5-star army became even more famous. Everyone saw the attitude of the 5-star army towards the dead. It was said that not only the direct troops of the 5-star army, but also the Cambodian soldiers who died in the battle and the civilians of Suwon City who participated in the resistance against the enemy received a handsome pension. It was said that Bugnam of Gojoseon had promised that the families of these martyrs would be given jobs. In other words, he was not only responsible for the dead, but also for the living. As soon as the news came out, the number of people who signed up to join the army in Cambodia increased by several times. Many young men were still complaining that the appearance of the 5-star army had broken the peace of their lives. However, when they saw the attitude of Yang Chendong towards the civilians of Suwon City, their mentality changed. They realized that Bugnam of Gojoseon really treated them as his own people. He was really working hard for them to have a better life in the future. On top of this, there was only one more condition, which was to respect the Han people. So what? When did ordinary people have the final say? When did they ever enjoy real freedom? There was only one more Han Chinese above them. As long as they acknowledged this point, they would be able to live a better life and obtain more freedom. So why not? No one liked being born inferior. However, when the general trend was like this, there was nothing they could do to change it. In such an environment, being a soldier to defend the country could give them a new hope. They even had the opportunity to raise their status and bring glory to their ancestors. So, what reason did they have not to do it? In fact, as early as the moment the Phnom Penh dynasty became the province of Cambodia, some policies about Yang Xie had been spread. However, most people did not believe it. Today, Yang Chendong used facts to teach everyone a lesson. This kind of doubtful thoughts finally disappeared, allowing more people to see the difference between the 5-star army and making more people envious. There were also more people who launched practical actions and began to sign up for enlistment. Ding Ding Wei and De told the good news to Yang Chendong. Then, they looked forward to it. They were happy about the change in the people's views. Although they were former officials of the Phnom Penh dynasty, they could still see who treated the people better. Yang Chendong really wanted to let the people under his rule live a happier life. With this, they should support him. The reason why they looked forward to it was because they were worried that Yang Chendong would not allow these ambitious young people to join the army. After all, the 5-star army paid attention to the elite route. It had always been the quality of the soldiers rather than the quantity. It was also possible to refuse these people to join the army. However, this would greatly reduce their enthusiasm, which would increase the difficulty of managing them in the future. Under their expectant gazes, Yang Chendong pondered for a moment before giving his answer. Since they are so hot-blooded, how can we hurt their hearts? Then let's arrange for an assessment. If the conditions permit, and if there are no problems with identity and background, they can join the army. Yang Chendong actually agreed, which naturally made Ding Ding Wei and De happy. But then there was another problem. De quickly said, "Sixth young master, this time there are many people who signed up for the army. Not only Suwon City, but many young people of the right age in many towns nearby. If they pass the assessment and political review, can they all join the army?" Of course. Yang Chendong did not understand what De meant. On the other hand, Ding Ding Wei quickly said, "Sixth young master, it's like this. This time, there are a lot of people, and there should be a lot of people who passed the assessment. If they all join the army, then the military strength of Cambodia will naturally increase by several times, so the financial pressure will naturally be great. It doesn't matter. As long as they are physically qualified and willing, we can accept them. But we have to explain to them in advance that Cambodia alone does not need so many soldiers. They will have a new place to go in the future. As long as we are prepared, we can accept as many as we want." In this battle, Yang Chendong saw the drawbacks of insufficient military strength. Although he had this feeling before, with the elite route, even if the enemy had a large number of soldiers, what could they do? They would still be defeated by him. But this time, in the face of the sudden attack of the Siamese army, the lack of military strength was finally revealed. Yang Chendong finally understood that sometimes, it was not enough to have a good number of soldiers. It was the truth that ants could kill an elephant. A small country like Siam gave him so much pressure. If he wanted to conquer the West in the future and occupy a larger area of land, how could he do it without enough military strength? If that was the case, he would just recruit soldiers. Other forces could support so many soldiers, so how could Yang Xie not be able to do it? Out of consideration for the future, Yang Chendong agreed to the expansion of the military. Not only that, but he also sent a message to several other provinces. He knew very well that it wouldn't take long for the news of Cambodia province's recruitment to spread out. By then, the men from other provinces would inevitably ask for such a request. Instead of waiting for them to ask for instructions, it was better to just let it go. He wanted to see how many soldiers he could gather with his forces. Just like that, the matter of conscription was settled. As usual, he only sent a telegram to the Crimson City Lord Manor and the military to state the facts. This clearly showed his attitude. "I'm only informing you, not asking for your opinion. Just do as you're told." The recruitment was handed over to Ding Ding Wei and Dagan, who were familiar with the local environment. In Suwon City, Yang Chendong received Lu Zhua, the commander of the new 1st Cavalry Division, who had just arrived. Yang Chendong did not have to be polite to this old subordinate. After learning that Lu Zhua's condition was stable and there were no symptoms of acclimatization, he said, "Since there is no problem with the army, then go and prepare. We will set off in 2 days. It is time to seek justice from Siam." The king of Siam was in Bangkok. General Tong had already fled in defeat. However, he had already lost his freedom the moment he entered the royal capital. He was captured by the king's guards who had been waiting here for a long time and locked up in prison. This time, Siam King Ili Chi believed Tong's words. He sent an army to reinforce the eastern front. He even sent out the few cannons he had. However, in the end, he did not manage to capture Yang Chendong, but the news of the army's defeat. Since the matter had failed, someone had to take responsibility for it. Tong naturally became the culprit. For this matter, Uliqui found Prime Minister Hammond and personally announced his decision to behead Tong Si. According to him, if a general lost a battle, he had to be punished, especially when the five-star army's counterattack was imminent. If he did not deal with Tong, the other generals would not do their best. In the end, they would lose the battle and flee back to the capital. Hamad had a different view on the king's order. From his point of view, when the two armies were at war, it was not auspicious to kill one's general. It would only disappoint the other generals. But since it was the king's order, he had to obey. Therefore, he arranged for someone to go to the dungeon and announce that Tong would be locked up and executed after the battle. From his point of view, since it had to be done, it was best to delay it as much as possible and not let the bad news spread. Tong, who was only one step away from success, was locked up in the dungeon and waiting to be executed after the battle. If he had known this would happen, it would be hard to say if he would have escaped back to the royal city. What Tong didn't expect was that even though he was about to die, the five-star army didn't let him off. He fainted after consuming a meal, and when he opened his eyes, he was already out of the dungeon. He couldn't believe that someone would spend a huge sum of money to buy him out of the dungeon. Chapter 1038. The person said that he was General Tong's family, and they were willing to exchange him for someone of similar stature. He was just a dying man. When the prison guard saw the large amount of gold and silver, he handed him over without much thought. After all, he was going to die anyway, so no one would pay attention to him. However, they did not know that this was the beginning of the disaster for Siam. Everything started with Yang Chendong's telegram reprimanding the intelligence department. The Siamese army split into two groups and marched towards Cambodia to intimidate Laos. The five-star army actually didn't notice such an important military intelligence. It was no wonder that Yang Chendong scolded Yang San in the telegram for being useless. If he couldn't do it, then he should find someone capable to do it. Feeling Yang Chendong's anger, Yang San sent a secret telegram to Golden Rooster, who was in charge of the situation in Southeast Asia. However, this telegram was like a stone thrown into the sea. Helplessly, they had to send someone to investigate. Finally, they received news that Wu Gui, who was temporarily in charge of Sky Sparrow, had been captured by the Siamese army. He was nicknamed Golden Rooster, and his real name was Wu Gui. Just like the Great Ming Dynasty had the Genie Guards and the East Faction Guards, and the five-star army had the Ministry of State Security and the CIA, Siam also had its own intelligence organization, and they had found Wu Gui's location in advance. It was in an inconspicuous courtyard in Bangkok. Siam beat them at their own game. They did not take him down immediately. Instead, under the instructions of Prime Minister Hamad, they only watched him and did not alert the enemy. When the Siam army was preparing for war, Wu Gui, nicknamed Golden Rooster, was gathering his subordinates for a meeting. The Siam army broke in and captured him. They killed 7 members of the intelligence department on the spot, including Golden Rooster. Because the matter was done secretly, and the key members of the intelligence department who knew about Golden Rooster's whereabouts were either dead or captured, the security department did not know about this at all. It was not until Yang Chendong's telegram that they could not contact him that they sent someone to investigate. Only then did they know everything. The intelligence network of the Ministry of State Security in Siam was wiped out. When the news reached Chichen City, 5th Madame Su Maner, who was in charge of the CIA, felt that her opportunity had arrived. Since the establishment of the CIA, although it had done some things, its contributions were not very great. The reason was that the intelligence network of the Security Bureau had been established long ago. At this time, it was not easy for the CIA to insert a rod into it. Not only did they have to face the obstruction of enemy intelligence departments, but they also had to be suppressed by the Ministry of State Security. That's right, it was true that Su Monair was Yang Chendong's fifth madam, but Yang San was a servant who had followed Yang Chendong for many years. He was extremely trusted and valued. When it came to intelligence, he was naturally unwilling to give in. For the sake of the fifth madam, he had already shown enough respect by not directly suppressing the CIA. It was very difficult for the CIA, which was established late and had lost the initiative, to gain any achievements. As the person behind the scenes, Su Monair had been looking for an opportunity to make a breakthrough. Finally, the opportunity had come. The incident in Siam made her feel that there was an opportunity to take advantage of. Immediately, she sent out a very clean female intelligence member, nicknamed Xianxia, to secretly go to the capital of Siam. According to Su Monair's intention, Xianxia's arrival was to investigate more of the Siam army's movements, as well as whether or not she could analyze their next move. After Xianxia arrived, she learned that General Tong had returned to the capital through buying information with a large sum of money. As such, she immediately bribed someone to be a spy in the prison, wanting to keep an eye on this General Tong. Xianxia had a feeling that the sixth young master would not spare this person. Then, his every move had to be carefully monitored. What she did not expect was that the king of Siam was so decisive and actually gave the order to execute him after the war. Since there was no chance to kill this person on the battlefield, Xianxia had the idea that she could not let him go. Thus, she spent a large sum of money to exchange him in the name of Tong's family. After taking down Tong in this way, Xianxia reported the matter. In her opinion, it was just a trivial matter. However, she did not expect that this telegram would be sent to Yang Chendong. The original intention was for Su Monair to ask how she wanted to punish the culprit. In Yang Chendong's eyes, his eyes could not help but light up. You must hide him well. If it is not safe, kill him on the spot. In short, do not leave any traces behind. Try your best to deny this matter to the outside world. I have great use for it. After sending this telegram, Yang Chendong immediately sent another telegram to Luopa, the commander of the Second Army, who had already made preparations to send out troops in Wanxiang City. He allowed him to send out troops to Siam and reminded him that all logistical matters could be handled by the governor of Lao Province, Wuan Shaochen. After sending out these two telegrams, Yang Chendong's third telegram was also sent out. It was sent to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Qiqian City, Ma Dali. He requested to send people to Siam as soon as possible to negotiate. After sending out the telegram, Yang Chendong waved his hand and sent out troops to Siam. He had the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new army, half of the 5th Division of the Lu Army, and a total of 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, temporarily recruited. In total, he had more than 70,000 people. It was quite a powerful force. Next, it was time for him to seek justice. Wanxiang City. After receiving the telegram, the commander of the Second Army, Luopa, took the initiative to look for Wuan Shaochen and Long Tainan. He said that he would immediately send out troops according to the sixth young master's orders and ask them to help and cooperate with him. Whether it was Wuan Shaochen or Long Tainan, they were both relatives of Yang Chendong. In addition, one of them was the leader of Laos, while the other was in charge of the stability of the public security under Yang Chendong's influence. Both of them were very powerful. Even though Luopa was already a major general, he still showed a lot of respect when he saw them. Commander Luo, don't worry. Lao Province will definitely listen to the orders of the sixth young master. We will fully support you. If you want money, we will give you money. If you want things, we will give you things. This was Wuan Shaochen's declaration. Then came Long Tianan's voice. Commander Luo, don't worry. I have already discussed with General He Guang. We will try our best to keep up with your pace. During this period, we have recruited a total of 40,000 soldiers. We will fully support you. After more than 10 days, while the situation in Suwang City was worrying, Wan Shaochen and Long Tainan did not stay idle. After they reached a common goal, they did something very bold without being able to contact Yang Chendong. That was to recruit soldiers on the spot. Especially the police force. Under Long Tianan's request, many people joined the army and became members of the Lao army. This allowed the army to expand in a short period of time and reached a total of 40,000 people. It was also proven that their thoughts were the same as Yang Chendong's. As expected, Cambodia province started to expand the army. However, Lao province's actions were done before this order. Because of this, Wan Shaochen and Long Tainan jointly signed a telegram to Yang Chendong to ask for forgiveness. Not only was military power important, it was also very sensitive. It was like a double-edged sword. If used well, it could be used to kill the enemy. If not, it would hurt oneself. Knowing this, the two of them had to show some attitude. Of course, Yang Chendong also had to show some attitude. He ended the telegram by telling them not to do it again. This was also a reminder to some people that privately recruiting and dispatching troops was not allowed. This warning was a warning that it would not happen again. After receiving support, Commander Luo Pa finally let loose. Other than the 7th Division who remained in Vietnam to stabilize the situation, the 2nd Division and the 6th Division moved out. They suddenly left Wanxiang City and charged towards the Siamese camp outside the city. Following behind these two divisions were the 40,000 newly recruited Lao army soldiers. They were made up of young and strong Lao army soldiers who had yet to get used to each other. At this point, the North, South and East 5-star armies started to retaliate against Siam. On the north was the 2nd and 6th divisions led by Luo Pa, as well as the 40,000 Lao soldiers, a total of 67,000 men. On the east was the 1st Cavalry Division led by Yang Chendong, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, half of the 5th Division and 50,000 Cambodian soldiers, a total of 74,000 men. On the south was the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st and 2nd Divisions of the 1st C Division. They had a total of 17,000 soldiers. Among them, C's 2nd Division, Zhao Changchao, had already captured Pearl Island, later known as Phuket Island, cutting off Siam's southern road by land. After C's 1st Division occupied Samui Island, they used the water to enter the land and surrounded Pattaya, later known as Tabaya, which was southeast of Bangkok, forming complete control over the entire southern sea of Siam. When the North Army left Wanxiang City, they caught the Siam Army off guard. Over the past few days, the Siam Army had gotten used to the 5-star Army's defense and did not expect them to suddenly attack. The 20,000 unprepared Siam Army was crippled by the 2nd and 6th Divisions of the Lu Army. Amidst the sounds of gunfire, they were defeated. In less than an hour, they left behind 3,000 corpses and fled. Luo Pajuan left the task of cleaning up the battlefield to the 40,000 Lao soldiers led by Long Tainan and General He Guang. Then, he continued to lead the 2 army divisions to Wulong City, an important city in the north of Siam. At this moment, Siam's General Godin was in the city. He had just heard the news of the 5-star Army's attack. Not long after, he saw his soldiers being defeated. He also saw the 5-star Army soldiers in green chasing after his soldiers. The intelligence personnel had already reported the information. Every 5-star Army soldier who could wear a formal suit belonged to the elite faction. They were not easy to deal with. Although Godin had 200,000 soldiers, he did not dare to be careless. He immediately ordered his men to prepare to defend the city. Cannons, bows, rocks, and kerosene were all prepared. For the sake of safety, he didn't even have the slightest intention of letting the 10,000 defeated soldiers outside the city into the city. Chapter 1039. If they didn't open the gates, they would only lose 10,000 soldiers. Once they opened the gates, the main force would be in danger. With the city's defense and the 50 cannons, they might be able to inflict heavy damage to the main force of the 5-star army. General Gordon was ambitious. This time, he wanted to use his actions to humiliate the 5-star army. He wanted to tell them that the Siamese army wasn't like the Tsanglan army or the Phnom Penh army. They were capable of fighting. While Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city, the 5-star corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Gordon was waiting for the enemy to approach the city so that he could destroy one of them with his cannons. The 5-star corps stopped moving. They took out their 100mm mortars and aimed at the city tower. Looking down from above, Gordon saw that the 5-star army stopped moving when they were 5 miles away. He didn't understand what they were up to. He didn't have to wait for long before reality told him the truth. Luo Po ordered the cannons to open fire. The mortar cannons could fire up to 13 li away. Using Wulong City, which was only 5 li away, as a target, it was as easy as playing a game. A total of 40 cannons rained down on the city walls, causing blood to splatter everywhere. Gordon, who was waiting for the enemy to approach, didn't expect the enemy to open fire from such a distance. His cannons could only fire up to a distance of 1,000 meters. This caused him to subconsciously limit his vision. Then, amidst the explosions, he was knocked to the ground by the shockwave. Fortunately, the soldiers beside him were very diligent. They pushed General Gordon to the ground. With 1 dead, 1 heavily injured, and 2 lightly injured, Gordon was safe and sound. He only lost his hearing temporarily. Not only Gordon, the Siamese soldiers on the city tower also lost their hearing. Other than the buzzing sound, they couldn't hear anything from the outside world. After a round of bombardment, the 2nd and 6th Division started to charge forward. To the cold front warriors who had to train at least 3 to 5 kilometers a day, a distance of 2,500 meters was nothing. Under the cover of the artillery, they arrived at the city gate that had already been destroyed. After a round of gunfire, they opened up a path and easily killed their way into the city. On the tower, the 50 cannons that had been transported to the North Tower had been reduced to a pile of scrap metal. Beside him, there were almost 1,000 dead bodies of the Siamese soldiers. The other survivors, including General Gordon, had already fled downstairs. In other words, it wasn't that they were useless. It was that their opponents were too strong. Facing the 2nd and 6th Division, who were fully equipped with firearms, the Siamese soldiers were caught off guard. They didn't even know much about them. Thus, they suffered a great loss in the first battle. The 200,000 soldiers of the Siamese army retreated like fish in the sea. It could be said that human potential was infinite. With the mentality of saving their lives, the Siamese soldiers retreated so quickly that the 5-star army couldn't catch up to them. Except for a few who managed to catch up, the main force of the Siamese army fled south. After the victory of the first battle, they killed and captured 30,000 Siamese soldiers. Wulong City was handed over to the Laotian army. After a simple rest, Luo Yin led the 2 divisions and continued south. The news of the defeat on the northern battlefield quickly spread back to Manga City. In the palace hall, King Yi Li Qi showed an expression of disbelief, and asked a very idiotic question in front of all the civil and military officials: what is the 5-star army doing? Are they going to destroy Siam like they did to Lancang and Golden Rim? Proud people would always magnify their own strengths for no reason, but at the same time, they would also magnify their enemies' weaknesses. In Yi Liqui's eyes, Siam was the strongest army in the world. Perhaps it was a little weaker than the 5-star army, but they had their own strengths. How could they be bullied so easily? Yi Liqui's shout attracted a lot of discussion in the palace. Then, Prime Minister Hamad stood up and said, "Your Majesty, the 5-star army is coming." Looking at the fate of Lancang and Golden Rim, we must be prepared for a war. Sure, let's fight. Who's afraid? Siam had just entered the era of big cities. In comparison, its politics were clean and the people were loyal. Its strength was not weak. This was also where Iluqi's foundation lay. Before the war, Iluqi had found Hamad and a few other important officials. After a discussion, they agreed that the 5-star army was not strong enough to destroy Siam. In other words, even if they lost the war, they could just lower their heads and give some compensation. The possibility of the country being destroyed was still very small. It was because of this point that Iluqi agreed to send troops. He wanted to take the 5-star army by surprise and reshuffle the cards in Southeast Asia. Now it seemed that it did play a role in the early stages. They even surrounded Yang Chendong. At that time, victory was so close. Unfortunately, Tong Si did not take advantage of this opportunity. In the end, he missed out on victory. Since they could not win, they had to think about how to stay in an invincible position. Considering the plan prepared before the war, Prime Minister Hamad continued, "Your Majesty, I request to send a message to the 5-star army to negotiate. Please allow it." Approved. Iluqi had to nod and agree. Unless he was prepared to fight to the death with the 5-star army, he could only negotiate and use this method to quell the flames of war. Under the cold consent of King Iluqi, the royal capital Bangkok once again gathered 200,000 troops to prepare for war. They were ready to support the various battlefields at any time. At the same time, they also sent a message to the 5-star army to express their intention to negotiate. The so-called peace talks were often the result of fighting. Fighting and fighting, fighting and fighting, everything came to a conclusion. In the end, it was a happy scene for everyone. After the Siam army lost the upper hand, the news of peace talks came. The commander of the East Army, Yang Chendong, who was leading the army to Siam, laughed after hearing the news. All of this was within his expectations. He even sent a telegram to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in advance and asked them to send people over. Peace talks? They killed so many of our brothers. Now that our reinforcements are here, they are afraid. They want peace talks? How can there be such a good thing in the world? Beta Persei muttered to express his anger. Beta Persei's opinion made Yang Chendong speechless. In this battle, more than 200 black cavalry soldiers and more than 4,000 soldiers of the 5th Division died. It was a heavy loss. But in comparison, what benefits did the Siam army gain? The number of people captured and killed had exceeded 120,000. This was already a 30-fold loss ratio. At this moment, the king of Siam was the one suffering, not him. But then again, the lives of the 5-star army soldiers were very important. How could it be compared to the Siam army? From this point of view, Beta Persei's words were not wrong. That's right. It's impossible to talk about peace and let this matter slide. This time, we are determined to get Siam. Yang Chendong's attitude was very firm. Beta Persei's eyes lit up when he heard this. However, Yang Chendong's next words made Beta Persei a little confused. But based on the information we have, Siam prepared a full 800,000 soldiers before this battle. So far, we have destroyed about 200,000 soldiers. There are at least 600,000 soldiers left. Beta Persei, tell me, with our current strength, can we defeat them? Yes, 600,000 is. Beta Persei stopped mid-sentence. This was 600,000, not 60,000. The total number of soldiers of the 5-star armies, even if the average D-ping were to be included, they would only have around 150 to 160,000 men. Even if they wanted to destroy the enemy, they still had to split up their forces to defend the cities that they had occupied. Beta Persei did not speak, and Yang Chendong did not intend to ask any more questions. Instead, he looked thoughtfully in the direction of Siam. A bold plan was formed in his mind again. This plan could be expressed in a very simple way. There were only 4 words: training troops on the battlefield. Soldiers who had never been on the battlefield could not be considered real warriors. This was true for ordinary soldiers. After a few battles, Yang Chendong had already seen his disadvantage. That was, he had too few troops. If he was so weak to deal with the Siam army, wouldn't he be in the same predicament if he was forced to fight against a bigger force in the future? For the future, he also needed to prepare for military training. How could he create a decent army in a short period of time? Their strength could not be said to be on par with the Cold Front, but at least they had to meet the requirements of a B-level army. After thinking about it, the only good idea was to train troops on the battlefield. With the 600,000 soldiers of Siam as a whetstone, Yang Chendong wanted to see how many B-level troops he could train. In order to achieve this goal, more local battles were needed. That was to say, how to fight the Siamese army continuously and make them send out their troops without getting angry became the most important thing. Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the best way was to talk while fighting. That was why he was so optimistic and hopeful about the upcoming negotiations between the two sides. Before Yang Chendong had to wait too long, someone from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs came. It was their minister, Ma Dali. Yang Chendong was somewhat surprised by Ma Dali's personal visit. He was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who stayed in Xichien City to preside over the overall situation. How could he come out so easily? Seeing the obvious doubt in Yang Chendong's eyes, Ma Dali smiled bitterly and said, "Sixth young master, for the current Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the most important thing is the war with Siam, so I came in person." Chapter 1040. Hearing Ma Dali's sincere answer, Yang Chendong smiled. Diplomatic work was usually divided into 3 types: enemies, friends, and countries, regions, or forces in the middle. However, Yang Xie rarely had any hostile forces around him. In the end, it was because of their military and financial strength. It was said that a weak country had no diplomacy. If Yang Chendong were to add another sentence, it would be to strengthen the diplomacy of the strong. Yes, whether it was a strong military or economic power, diplomatic work was relatively easier. Whether it was because of the desire for benefits or the fear of military power, no one was willing to provoke a strong country or force. Therefore, compared to the heavy work of other departments, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was much more relaxed. Finally, there was a strong country like Siam, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs finally had a chance to show its strength. As the minister, Ma Dali simply volunteered to be here. Since the previous minister, Yang Shan, stepped down because of his son, Yang Taizhu, Ma Dali had not achieved any outstanding results. Without any achievements, how could he convince the masses? Even when Yu Qian, as the city lord of Crimson City, held meetings with the status of Prime Minister Yang, Ma Dali rarely spoke. He had been looking for an opportunity to show his strength. Now that the opportunity had come, how could he let it go? After knowing Ma Dali's thoughts, Yang Chendong did not make any comments. A subordinate who wanted to achieve results should not be discouraged. On the contrary, he should encourage him. "Minister Ma, you have come this time. Whether you can defeat Siam or even win this war completely depends on your diplomatic skills. As long as you can hold them back, the longer the time, the greater the chance of victory. What do you think? Are you confident?" Yang Chendong was telling him the truth. Ma Dali took this opportunity to ask carefully, "Sixth young master, have you made up your mind? Do you really want to defeat Siam in one go?" Ma Dali was like a poisonous needle that was inserted into the enemy's heart. Yang Chendong naturally had no intention of hiding it from him. "That's right. I've already made my decision. But..." Ma Dali hesitated for a moment. When he saw Yang Chendong's encouraging eyes, he continued, but according to our investigation, Siam has just become a big city. Whether it is military, political, or economic, they are not weak. It will be difficult to take them down in one go. Difficult? It's like a spring. If you're strong, it's weak. Yang Chendong didn't care if the other party knew what a spring was, or if he could understand this saying. He still said decisively, if a person wants to grow, he has to go through some setbacks and difficulties. Similarly, if Yang Xia wants to expand, it has to do something that it knows is difficult. As long as it overcomes these difficulties, it will become stronger. Understood. Since Yang Chendong had already made up his mind, Ma Dali knew that there was no room for negotiation. He said, "Sixth young master, tell me, what do you want me to do next?" "What do I have to do?" It's actually not complicated. You just have to do this and that will do." No one knew what Yang Chendong and Ma Dali talked about, but they only knew that early the next morning, Ma Dali had set up a carriage and led a delegation of more than 100 people, representing the interests of the Yang faction, straight to Manga City. It was inevitable that some of the military officers couldn't understand the departure of the peace negotiators. Especially the commander of the 5th Division, Xiao Yining. In the battle on the Barren Mountain, half of his division had died. This was a grudge that must be avenged. Why would they suddenly enter into a state of peace negotiations? Lu Zhuo, the commander of the new army's 1st Cavalry Division, was also puzzled. He had traveled thousands of miles, taking a boat and rushing day and night. He hadn't even fought a single battle, and now they were going to negotiate? Then what was the point of him bringing the 1st Cavalry Division here? In the main tent, whether it was Xiao Yining or Lu Zhuo, after Yang Chendong said that they could say anything and ask anything, the two of them took the lead to speak, expressing the puzzlement in the hearts of their subordinates. In response to their questions, Yang Chendong only replied, "Who said we're not going to fight?" Just this one sentence confused the two commanders. Xiao Yining reacted a little faster. "But, didn't we already send people to negotiate with Siam?" "That's right." Lu Zhuo quickly added. "Who said that we can't continue fighting if we're negotiating?" "It doesn't matter. They can talk, we'll fight." Yang Chendong waved his hand casually again, as if they had all misunderstood. In response to Yang Chendong's answer, not only the two commanders, but also the other commanders in the main tent were confused. Even the commander of the 1st Cavalry Division, Tian Hu, was puzzled. He also didn't understand what the 6th young master was going to do. Why? Is it hard to understand? The young master meant that the war and peace negotiations can be carried out at the same time. However, when we fight, we don't have to send our main force to the front like before. Instead, we can send our reserve troops to the front. We can use this opportunity to see if there are any suitable seedlings. Yang Chendong saw that everyone was confused, so he simply explained it clearly. As soon as he said this, a few people were the first to understand. Especially Commander Tian Hu. Where did his 1st Cavalry Division come from? Wasn't it formed by constantly fighting on the battlefield and gathering elites? This was going to continue the old path. Naturally, he had the most right to speak. He immediately said, "The 6th young master means to train the soldiers through war?" "That's what I mean. Of course, as veterans who have experienced hundreds of battles, this time, you have to do your job as instructors. Not only that, once you find a good seedling, you can apply for recruitment. The young master will give you a certain amount of talent support. Of course, you have to do your job as instructors and examiners. You have to score every soldier in the war. This is an extremely important matter. Do you understand?" When he said these words, Yang Chendong especially looked at the commander of the 5th Cavalry Division, Xiao Yining. The meaning he wanted to express was very clear. Isn't the 5th Cavalry Division lacking in soldiers? Once this war is over, the 5th Cavalry Division can be reorganized. Even though Yang Chendong's meaning was very clear, and Xiao Yining was indeed moved, there was still a problem that he didn't clarify. Otherwise, he really wouldn't be happy. The sixth young master, if his performance is outstanding, can he be promoted? Of course. Otherwise, how can he join the 5th Cavalry Division? Yang Chendong said as if it was a matter of course. Good. I understand. At this moment, Xiao Yining's face finally revealed a smile. At this moment, he even became a little excited. He was still thinking that with the current ratio of young and strong Han men in Crimson City, it would be difficult to recruit more than 4,000 people. If things went wrong, it would affect the strength of the 5th Cavalry Division. Now that they could train the soldiers on the battlefield and recruit good seedlings, the 5th Cavalry Division would definitely be able to quickly return to its former glory. After the general plan was set, Yang Chendong announced a few more details. For example, only those who killed 10 people on the battlefield would be allowed to be promoted. Other than that, those who performed well would be able to enter the B-grade troops, the auxiliary troops of Crimson City, and those who performed well would be able to enter the C-grade troops, the provincial troops. As for those who didn't perform well, they would be given money to chase them away. In short, they would only fight for the sake of producing elite soldiers. If there were really no suitable candidates, it would be better to not have them than to form an army for the sake of numbers. Otherwise, not only would they be scamming them, they would also be scamming themselves. On the battlefield, the enemy wouldn't be afraid because of the number of soldiers you had. On the battlefield, victory wouldn't be decided by who had more soldiers. Using battle to nurture soldiers was carried out in an orderly manner under Yang Chendong's decision. According to his requirements, any commoner between the age of 16 and 35 who was under the Yang faction's influence could sign up. Then, the various cities would report the list to the various provincial governments, and in the end, the provincial governments would transport the people to the battlefield. In order to encourage people to sign up, Yang Chendong also proposed that the number of soldiers each province could choose would have a close relationship with the provincial governor and the various officers at the end of the year. In the end, there would be a reward system, praising the provinces that performed well and scolding the provinces that didn't, etc. The temptation of being promoted was already very big, and now that it was directly related to the official rank evaluation, who wouldn't want to try their best? Immediately, under the encouragement and publicity of the local governments, there were many people who signed up. Batches of young men who met the requirements were sent to the North Army's new Second Army, Luo Po's, and the East Army's Yang Chendong's. In the East Army, the first army that was approved to train soldiers was the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers who followed Yang Chendong. Of course, this was not all the soldiers of the right age in Cambodia. With a population of 4 million, it was not a problem to select a few 100,000 suitable soldiers. These 50,000 soldiers were just the first batch of soldiers to be sent to the battlefield. The power of training soldiers was completely delegated to the 3 division commanders, Tianhu, Xiao Yining, and Lu Zhua. After a discussion, they decided to only send 2,000 recruits to the battlefield at a time. In order to ensure that they would not be surrounded by the Siamese army, the 1st Cavalry Division, the 1st Cavalry Division of the new 1st Army, and the 5th Division of the Lu Zhuo Po would send veterans to accompany them. They would only be sent out when they encountered suitable opponents, so as to ensure that they could complete the training requirements under the circumstances of equal strength and strength. The 5-star army had sent out envoys according to the king's request, and the troops were heading to the capital, Bangkok. For this reason, it was said that the 5-star army in the south had stopped their attack on Pattaya. After receiving this news, the Siamese army, which was originally very nervous, immediately relaxed. Chapter 1041. It was at this time that a scout suddenly reported that a small unit of the 5-star army had left the border city of Bob and was heading towards Shafu city. After hearing the news, the Siamese army was very puzzled. The Siamese general guarding Shafu city immediately sent people to stop them, as if he wanted to persuade them to stop moving forward. In the middle of Bob and Shafu city, the two sides met. On one side was a Cambodian army of 2,000 people, and on the other side was a Siamese army of 5,000 people. The veterans of the 5-star army who followed and protected them quickly made a decision. This battle was worth fighting. At least in their eyes, if they were the ones fighting, they would not need 2,000 people, but 1,000 people would be enough to win. With this decision, the first training of the soldiers began. The mixed soldiers were mixed soldiers. They did not have much training, and most of them relied on brute force. The result of the first battle was no surprise. More than 300 of the 2,000 soldiers were killed on the spot, and the rest fled back. According to the information obtained by the veteran scouts, not even 100 Siamese soldiers were killed. When the news reached Yang Chendong's ears, he was not surprised at all. Some soldiers who had not undergone systematic training were just a bunch of brute force. They did not even have a basic degree of cooperation. It was impossible for them to defeat the disciplined Siamese army. Just like the so-called Jianghu people, they might be a headache if they fought alone, but once they gathered together, no matter how many of them there were, they would not be a match for the imperial army. If the army made up of Lao men really wanted to win, they would have to learn how to cooperate, get used to blood, and really mature. Then, they might have the qualifications to defeat the Siamese army. Of course, this was not something that could be done overnight. Fortunately, Yang Chendong had time to wait. Even if more of these people died, Yang Chendong would not show any sadness. These were all alien races, and for a certain period of time, he had even thought about how to stop the growth of the alien race population, and what kind of attitude and methods he should adopt towards these adult alien males. This was one of the methods that Yang Chendong had thought of. This was one of the methods that Yang Chendong had thought of when a foreign woman married a Han man. From the looks of it, the effects were pretty good. Now that they had the advantage of sacrificing foreign men on the battlefield, even if foreign women wanted to get married in the future, they would have no choice but to choose Han men. This was a way to eliminate the foreign race. At the same time, it was also a kind of gospel for the Han men. It was also a vicious method that Yang Chendong used to unify the Han people. Perhaps some people could see this point. Perhaps there would be people in the future who would comment on this matter. Some people might even criticize his backbone because of this, but Yang Chendong did not care. What he wanted was the day when the Han people became strong and dominated the world. As for what others thought of him, it was not important. To paraphrase a saying, who cares if there is a flood after his death? The first attack failed, but soon the second Cambodian army was sent out. They were either inspired by the fact that the 5-star army, with less than 10,000 people, could fight for so long against the Siamese army and won a great victory, so they looked down on the Siamese army. Or maybe the conditions that Yang Chendong gave to the victors were so good that they could not bear to try. Or maybe it was because they wanted to prove themselves through this battle. They wanted to tell their relatives in their hometown and their women that the 5-star army was not the only one in the world who knew how to fight. They were real men and they could do it too. Regardless of the reason, there were waves of Cambodian soldiers. Under the control of the 5-star army, they were divided into groups of 2,000 people and entered the Siamese territory, looking for an opportunity to fight the Siamese army. At this moment, in the capital of Siam, Manga City, Minister Madali had appeared as the representative of Xianxia. He was warmly received by Prime Minister Hamad. What was a politician? The performance of the two men was obvious. No matter how fierce the battle was before and how many people were killed or injured, when they met this time, their faces were full of joy. Those who did not know the inside story would definitely think that the two men must be old friends. They would never think that they were scheming against each other. On the way into the city, Hamad even prepared a small welcoming ceremony to show the people that Siam still loved peace. Even when the situation was good, they still negotiated with the emissary sent by Xianxia. This showed that they were broad-minded. Yes, in the hearts of most of the Siamese who did not know the situation, they were the most powerful when they had just entered the city. Even in this battle against the 5-star army, from the beginning until now, they had always been in a dominant position. Not long ago, there was news that the leader of the 5-star army was surrounded by them. If it were not for the sake of peace in the future and wanting to persuade the leader to surrender, they would have killed him directly. That was a war where hundreds of thousands of people surrounded less than 10,000 enemies. Even if everyone spat, the war would have ended. Ma Dali walked beside Hammond with a smile on his face as they crossed the street. In fact, he and his team had heard the discussions of the people on the streets. Those who were able to enter the Foreign Affairs Department were naturally knowledgeable people. Among them, there were many graduates of the Yang Family Academy and the Crimson City Academy. When they entered the school, they were exposed to a course called Foreign Languages. In the words of the founder, Yang Chendong, if you want to defeat your enemy, you must first understand your enemy. For this reason, Ma Dali had brought many talents who understood Siamese into this team. Even he had no problem conversing with them. With this advantage, the conversations of the people on the street naturally fell into their ears. This allowed them to have a deeper understanding of the situation in Bangkok and obtain first-hand information. All of this was outside of Hamad's expectations. He was certain that there were people who understood Siamese in this team, just like how there were people who understood Chinese beside him. However, the number was definitely not too many. Otherwise, he wouldn't have lined the streets to express his sincerity. Both parties passed through the commotion and finally arrived at the courtyard in the city that was specially used to receive foreign ambassadors. Upon entering, the originally smiling Ma Dali and Hamad seemed to have changed into a different person. Their smiles were retracted and replaced with a solemn expression. "Esteemed envoy Ma, you must be tired from the long journey. Take a rest for the night. If there is anything else, we will discuss it tomorrow." Hamad didn't immediately enter his role. He needed to give Ma Dali some time to rest. He also needed to think carefully about what to do next. Ma Dali acted as if he didn't understand Hamad's words. Only when the interpreter translated the words into Chinese did he nod and say, "Thank you for your understanding. Since that is the case, we will meet again tomorrow." When he said that he would see her the next day, no one would have thought that this delay would be half a month later. Of course, at this moment, Hamad was truly prepared to have a good discussion with Ma Dali tomorrow and see what the other party wanted. Therefore, after settling down the 5-star army ambassadors, he headed straight for the palace. According to his intention, he would first report to the king and receive a general decree. Upon entering the palace, not only did Hamad see the king, Hilakui, he also saw another first-rank general guarding the western border of Siam, Chun Hoang. According to the Great Ming Dynasty system, Chun Hoang was considered a relative of the emperor. His sister married Hilakui and was deeply favored by the emperor. Because of this, he was promoted several times from a small general stationed with 100 soldiers. In the end, he became a first-rank general, second only to Gordon. Relatives of the king were not allowed to interfere in politics. This was the same everywhere. Thus, Chun Hoang had no choice but to leave the capital and head to the safest western border of Siam. He became a first-rank general in name and was mainly responsible for dealing with the Awol dynasty. To put it bluntly, he was completely a figurehead. This time, they had started an all-out war with the 5-star army. They had seized the initiative and were now in a stalemate. The situation was gradually developing in a bad direction. It could be said that it was the time for the entire country to mobilize their troops. As a first-rank general, Chun Hoang naturally returned. Not only that, when he returned, he brought with him good news that he had just received from the military. The 5-star army's attacks from the north and east had suddenly become weak. News of the Siam army's victories came from the front lines. Translator, Nyoibo Studio Editor, Audiobook Studio. Good news made Yelinki very happy. After knowing the purpose of Chun Huang's visit, Yelinki immediately welcomed him. Yelinki knew the whole story and knew that the 5-star army had been launching attacks every day. Although the scale of the attacks was not very big, it was a real attack. The Siamese army naturally fought back. Originally, they were expecting a fierce battle. But who would have thought that the 5-star army could not fight anymore? Is this true? King Yi Liqui's face was filled with disbelief as he asked. Yes, there are battle reports from all sides. One of them was written by General Gordon himself, Chun Huang said with a face full of flattery and joy. As the saying goes, love the house and its crow. Since he liked Chun Huang's sister, Liqui naturally did not dislike Chun Huang. Now that Chun Huang brought news of victory, he could not help but laugh heartily. This was the first time Yi Liqui laughed heartily since the start of the war with the 5-star army. At this time, Hammond entered the palace to report the situation. When he saw the king laughing so happily, he was also curious. Your Majesty, when did you become so happy? Tell me and I will be happy too. Good. General Chun, tell the Prime Minister about this. Yi Liqui was in a good mood and immediately agreed. Chapter 1042. With a smile on his face, Chun Huang turned around and bowed to Hammond. He then said, Prime Minister, news just came from the front lines. The 5-star army's attack is weak. After several battles, they have suffered heavy losses. Our side has won. And this is all thanks to His Majesty. His Majesty's troops represent the righteous. Even the heavenly sect was moved, resulting in today's victory. Chun Huang did not forget to take the opportunity to flatter the king. At the same time, he was carefully observing Hammond's reaction. Just like in most dynasties, civil and military were at odds. In Siam, civil and military rarely got along. In particular, the reason why Chun Huang left the capital for Shijiang was because of the advice of Hammond and the other civil officials. He hated these people from the bottom of his heart. But because the king valued these civil officials, he had no choice but to deal with them. But no action did not mean no thoughts. During his time in Shijiang, Chun Huang was constantly thinking about revenge. This time, he was looking for an opportunity to do so. In his view, if he wanted to take revenge, the first person he had to deal with was the Prime Minister, who wielded enormous influence in the court. If he did not topple this mountain, once the war was over, he would probably have to return to the western border to suffer. Prime Minister Hammond didn't think too much about it. At least at this moment, his mind was completely focused on government affairs. When he heard Chun Huang say that the situation on the front lines was starting to turn for the better, he was truly confused. If not for the fact that he understood General Gordon and knew that this person was the worst at lying, he would have doubted the veracity of this matter. Since even General Gordon said that the front lines had won, Hammond had to think carefully about what was going on. From the bottom of his heart, Hammond did not believe it. A 5-star army that could defeat the Jiaoji kingdom, the Lansang dynasty, and the Golden Bian dynasty, as well as occupy the Luzon Island and a large area of the sea, they stunned everyone from the moment they appeared. With their strong financial resources and powerful military capabilities, there were few who would not follow their orders. How could such an army suddenly have such a low combat strength? This didn't make any sense at all. Hammond suddenly stopped talking. He didn't express any opinion and just stood there with a frown on his face. Chun Huang saw all of this and it was difficult for him to find a weakness. He had no choice but to continue asking. Prime Minister? Why do you look unhappy? Are you unhappy that the army won the battle at the front lines? After this reminder, even King Ili Chi paid attention to it. But out of trust, he still said, how can that be? The Prime Minister is the Prime Minister of Siam. He will naturally be happy to hear that the frontline army has won the battle. Yes, of course I'm happy. At this moment, Hammond also recovered and hurriedly replied. But after saying this, he still voiced out his doubts. It's just that the 5-star army has always been known for their extraordinary combat strength. Why did they suddenly become weak this time? Weakened? Chun Hong finally caught the opportunity and said, how can it be weakened? It should be because our Siam army is too strong. Under His Majesty's wise leadership, we have vigorously developed our military. The treatment and training of the army are the best. Why can't such a good army win the battle? Prime Minister, as a general leading an army, I really can't agree with what you're saying. The Siamese army was indeed stronger than the other neighboring countries. But if it was said that they could easily defeat the 5-star army, Hammond would never believe it. He decided to see for himself and personally go to the front line to see for himself. Your Majesty, I am willing to go to the front line. Please allow it. This was Hammond's strength. He would not easily agree with the opinions of others. He would only make a decision after seeing the results. This was also the reason why Li Qi felt at ease using him, so he didn't even hesitate and agreed to this request. Hammond had something on his mind, so he didn't stay for long. Before he left, he only said that the emissary from the 5-star army had arrived, and before the battle was completely settled, he still had to receive him with courtesy. He then left the palace hall, leaving behind Chun Hong to watch him leave. He said with some dissatisfaction, Your Majesty, he doesn't trust our army and General Gordon. Sigh, General Chun, don't think too much. Prime Minister is such a serious person. It's good to let him see. That way, we can rest assured. Li Qi was not influenced by Chun Huang's words. In his heart, he didn't really believe this news. He also hoped that someone could make a trip. Hammond's volunteering was exactly what he wanted. Ma Dali, who was in the emissary group's courtyard, did not know about this. The next morning, not only did he not see Hammond, who was supposed to be here, but everyone was also grounded. Considering that the two countries were at war, they were not allowed to leave the courtyard for fear of being affected. Fortunately, food and drinks were delivered in time. Otherwise, the minister would have to consider whether Siam was going to reveal their true intentions. The training of the soldiers on the northern and eastern fronts continued. The battle situation did not improve. The 40,000 Laotian soldiers on the northern front and the 50,000 Cambodian soldiers on the eastern front were sent out for battle for the third time. Relatively speaking, they would still lose against the Siam army. It was just that they did not lose as quickly. However, it was still far from a draw. It was also at this time that a steady stream of reserve troops arrived. After receiving Yang Chendong's orders, the provinces immediately started recruiting soldiers. The attractive policies were also spread to all the provinces under Yang Xie's control. Once they performed well, they could be promoted. Such a temptation tempted the foreign youths, who knew the power of the Han people, to no avail. With the opportunity in front of them, there were not many who did not want to seize it and give it a try. There were many such applicants. In a short period of time, 200,000 youths had signed up. It was said that this was only a portion of the total. There would be more applicants in the future. Since there were so many people who wanted to sign up, Yang Chendong naturally did not reject any of them. Yang Xie, who did not lack food, was never afraid of having too many people. He only despised having too few people. When the new batch of soldiers arrived, the disadvantage on the battlefield became even more obvious. In contrast, the morale of the Siam army was increasing day by day. The continuous victories had made some of the soldiers feel smug. When they found out that as long as they encountered the 5-star army, they would definitely be the ones to win. Although they didn't get much, they still had some achievements. They could report their military exploits and receive money. Therefore, everyone became more active. This was especially true when they discovered that their numbers were too large and they often couldn't find an opponent. When their numbers were only around 2,000, the 5-star army would take the initiative to jump out. They immediately divided their troops into groups of 2,000, allowing them to obtain more small-scale victories. A small victory was still a victory. Wasn't there a saying that went, "Many a little makes a man"? The Siam army was tirelessly busy. There were reports of victory every day. They were delivered to the commander of the army. Prime Minister Hammond, who had come to understand the actual situation, saw everything clearly. The battle reports were real. From time to time, some corpses of the 5-star army soldiers would be sent back. These could not be faked. All of this made Hammond speechless. Even the Siam army in the east had achieved such a great victory. With General Gordon leading the army in the north, there was nothing to doubt about the results. What was going on? Was the 5-star army's strength not enough due to the continuous expansion? Or was their standard just average to begin with? It was just that people had made them legends. Hammond could not understand this question. However, there was no need to think about it. Since they had achieved victory on the battlefield, there was nothing to be afraid of. He had to immediately return to the capital to report. At the same time, he had to change his strategy against the 5-star army. Negotiations could be discussed. However, this time, he did not have to compromise. Instead, he had to force the other party to compromise. This was something he had to consider. Satisfied, Hammond left. On the morning of his departure, news came from the security bureau. Yang San had arranged for Yun Ke, who was recuperating in Qiqian City, to return to Siam. With Golden Rooster Wu Gui's mistake, Skylark certainly didn't dare to be negligent and relax. He secretly watched the situation closely. As soon as the people left, the news came. They're gone. It's time to win a few battles to boost morale. After reading the report from the security bureau, Yang Chendong happily said to Beta Persei beside him. Have you calculated the number of qualified soldiers in the past 20 days? Young Master, Tian Hu, Xiao Yining, and Lu Zhua have reported the data every day. As of last night, there are about 35,000 soldiers who can be considered veterans. Beta Persei quickly replied. It was obvious that he had learned a lot from following Yang Chendong. Oh. This number is not low. Yang Chendong seemed surprised. He silently calculated in his heart. It turned out that they had trained nearly 2,000 soldiers every day. This was the benefit of actual combat. Survival of the fittest, war had the final say. Facts had the final say. In between life and death, people's potential could often be maximized. With that in mind, Yang Chendong opened his mouth again. Since it's like this, inform the 3 division commanders, they can adopt the strategy of the old leading the new. Out of the 2,000 men, they can choose 500 old soldiers to lead 1,500 new soldiers, and if the old soldiers have outstanding performance, they can be gathered together, and according to their performance, this young master will promote them, and according to their performance, we can decide if they will enter the A-grade army or B-grade army, and they can be the best candidates for the various divisions. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.